This Christmas, we are hosting your sister's fiancé, so there will not be room for you and your daughter at the table. My mother, Wanda, typed into the family group chat without a single emoji to soften the blow. My sister, Chantel, immediately followed up with, "But we still want you to make the dinner as always. Brent loves your prime rib." My father, Clarence, added, "And do not make us feel bad about it. I still want my gift." I stared at the screen and didn't make a scene. I simply turned off my phone, smiled, and mentally calculated the eviction notice period for the house they were sleeping in. Because what none of them seemed to remember was that the dining room table I was banned from sat inside a house that legally belonged to me. Before I tell you how I turned their exclusionary Christmas into their eviction day, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been treated like an outsider by your own blood. I am Renee, 34 years old, and I am the Vice President of Operations for one of the largest luxury food supply chains on the East Coast. My life is defined by logistics precision and solving expensive problems before they become disasters. On the morning of December 23rd, I was standing in the middle of a refrigerated distribution center in downtown Atlanta. The air was a biting 10 degrees and smelled of salt water and cardboard. My breath plumed in white clouds as I stared down a terrifyingly incompetent shift manager. "You have $50,000 worth of Alaskan king crab sitting on a loading dock that is 10 degrees too warm," I said, my voice low and steady. "If that product is not moved to deep freeze in 5 minutes, you are explaining the loss to the board, not me." The manager scrambled away, barking orders at his team. I adjusted the lapel of my wool coat and checked my clipboard. I was respected here. My word was law. I moved millions of dollars of inventory with a signature. But the moment my phone buzzed in my pocket, the confident executive vanished, and I instantly felt like the small, disregarded daughter of Clarence and Wanda again. I pulled my phone out, expecting a vendor update. Instead, I saw the notification from the group chat named Family Love, a title that felt more ironic with every passing year. I read my mother's message again. "There won't be room for you and your daughter at the table." It was not just about me. If they wanted to treat me like the help, I was used to that. I had been the family doormat for a decade. But Maya, my 12-year-old daughter, was innocent. Maya, who had spent the last month making handmade ornaments for her grandmother. Maya, who had practiced Christmas carols on her violin to play for her grandfather. They were relegating her to the mudroom or the kitchen counter, like she was a second-class citizen, while they feasted with my sister's new white fiancé and his parents. My chest tightened, not with sadness, but with a familiar burning humiliation. I looked around the warehouse at the workers moving with purpose at the empire I helped run. How could I be so powerful in the world and so pathetic in my own family? I started typing a reply. I wanted to say that this was unacceptable. I wanted to say that if we were not welcome at the table, we would not be coming at all. But then the old fear crept in. The fear that if I said no, they would cut us off completely and Maya would have no grandparents at all. I deleted my angry draft. I simply typed, "Okay, Mom, we will make it work." I hated myself as I pressed send. I told myself I was doing it for Maya. I was doing it to keep the peace. But deep down, I knew I was just enabling the monsters I had helped create. 2 hours later, having averted the crisis with the crab shipment, I found myself pushing a cart through the aisles of Whole Foods. This was not my usual grocery store, but Chantel had sent a specific list of ingredients she wanted for the dinner: organic grass-fed beef, truffle oil from Italy, heirloom carrots. She had expensive taste for someone who had not held a full-time job in 4 years. I stood at the butcher counter looking at the prime rib roast behind the glass. It was beautifully marbled, a deep, rich red. "That is a fine cut," the butcher said, wiping his hands on his apron. "It is going to be about $200, is that all right?" I nodded numbly. $200 for a piece of meat that I would likely have to eat on a paper plate in the laundry room, while Brent, the golden boy fiancé, ate off the good china. I reached for my wallet to pay, but my phone buzzed again. This time it was not a text. It was a fraud alert from Chase Bank. Transaction alert card ending in 4098. Authorization for $850 at Serenity Luxury Spa. Please reply 1 if authorized. My stomach dropped. That was the emergency credit card I had given my mother for household repairs like a burst pipe or a broken furnace. I stared at the screen. Serenity Luxury Spa was not a plumber. It was the most expensive day spa in Buckhead. I dialed Chantel immediately. She answered on the second ring, and I could hear soft Zen flute music in the background. "Hey, sis," she said, her voice thick with relaxation. "I thought you would be busy cooking by now." "Chantel," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "Why did I just get a charge for nearly $900 at a spa? Did Mom lose her card?" Chantel laughed, a light, airy sound that made my teeth ache. "Oh no, silly. Mom gave it to me. I had to get the full package today. Facial, massage, manicure, pedicure. You know the works. I have to look perfect for Brent's parents tonight. They are very upscale, Renee. I cannot look like I am stressed out." I stood there in the middle of the grocery store, gripping the handle of my cart until my knuckles turned white. "You used my emergency card for a spa day," I whispered. "Chantel, that money was for the house. That was for emergencies." Chantel sighed loudly, the sound of someone annoyed by a petty inconvenience. "Renee, stop being so dramatic. This is an emergency. My appearance is an investment in this family's future. When I marry Brent, we will all move up in the world. You should be thanking me for securing our social standing. Besides, you make plenty of money. What is a few $100s to you? Do not be stingy, it is Christmas." She hung up before I could respond. I stood there staring at the butcher who was holding the wrapped meat out to me, waiting for payment. I felt like screaming. I felt like overturning the cart and walking out. But I didn't. I was trapped in the role I had played since I was 16. The responsible one. The provider. The fixer. I took the meat. I pulled out my own debit card, not the one Chantel had just maxed out, and paid for the dinner that I was barely invited to eat. As I walked to my car, the winter wind hitting my face, I felt something shift inside me. It was a small crack in the dam of my patience. They wanted the perfect dinner. They wanted the perfect appearance. They wanted my money, my labor, and my silence. Well, I decided as I unlocked my car door. They were going to get exactly what they asked for. And when the bill finally came due, it was going to cost them a lot more than a prime rib roast. Christmas morning broke with a gray steel sky over Atlanta, mirroring the storm brewing inside my chest. The drive to my parents' house was usually a 30-minute commute, but today it felt like a funeral procession. My 12-year-old daughter Maya sat in the passenger seat of my Range Rover, clutching a small velvet bag on her lap. Inside was a handmade ceramic ornament she had painted for her grandmother, a perfect little angel with a slightly lopsided halo. The heater hummed softly, fighting against the frost on the windows, but the cold silence between us was harder to thaw. I gripped the leather steering wheel tight enough to turn my knuckles white, my eyes fixed on the winding suburban road. I was dreading this. Every mile marker we passed felt like a countdown to an inevitable disaster. Maya shifted in her seat, breaking the silence with a voice so small it nearly broke my heart. "Mom, do you think Grandpa remembers about the necklace?" Her question hung in the air, heavy with hope. I glanced over at her. She was wearing her best navy blue dress, her hair braided neatly, just the way my mother liked it. She had been talking about this necklace for months. It was a single pearl on a gold chain that had belonged to my great-grandmother. Legend had it that every girl in the Johnson family received it on her 12th Christmas. It was not just jewelry, it was a symbol of belonging. It was proof that you were seen, that you were valued, that you were part of the legacy. I swallowed the lump in my throat, forcing a smile I did not feel. "I am sure he remembers, baby. Grandpa knows how important tradition is. But listen to me, Maya. Even if he forgets or if things are busy with Aunt Chantel's fiancé being there, do not let it ruin your day, okay? You are a Johnson queen with or without a pearl." Maya nodded, looking out the window, but I saw her fingers crossed tightly over the velvet bag. She wanted to believe them. She still had that beautiful, dangerous childhood innocence that blinded her to the toxicity of our bloodline. I envied her, and I feared for her. As we passed the familiar turnoff near the old shopping mall, my mind was violently yanked back 10 years. The ghost of Christmas past was not a spirit, it was a memory of a transaction that changed how I saw my parents forever. I was 24 years old then, working 2 jobs and saving every penny to go to grad school. I drove a beat-up Honda Civic that rattled when it went over 40 miles per hour, but it was mine. I had bought it with my own money. One evening I came home to find my father Clarence sitting at the kitchen table with his head in his hands. My mother Wanda was pacing the floor weeping. They told me Dad was in trouble. Not health trouble, but gambling trouble. He owed $15,000 to some dangerous men in Atlantic City, and the deadline was 48 hours away. They had no savings. They had maxed out their credit cards, keeping up appearances at the country club. They turned to me, their responsible, reliable Renee. They begged me. They said they would lose the house. They said these men might hurt the family. So I did what a good daughter does. I sold my Honda. I drained my grad school fund. I handed them a check for $15,000, wiping out 3 years of my hard work in a single afternoon. For the next 6 months, I took the bus to work. I stood in the rain waiting for transit that was always late, while my parents continued to live in their big house pretending everything was fine. I told myself it was a sacrifice for the family. I told myself we were in this together. Then came the day Chantel turned 18. It was 2 weeks before she graduated high school. I walked up the driveway exhausted after a long bus ride and a mile walk carrying my grocery bags. And there it sat. A brand new pearl white BMW, wrapped in a giant red bow. My father was beaming holding the keys. My mother was clapping her hands. Chantel was screaming with delight, jumping up and down. I stood there frozen, my shoes soaked from the rain dropping my grocery bags on the pavement. I walked up to my mother, my voice trembling. "Mom, how? You told me we were broke. You told me you could not help me buy a bus pass last week. Where did this come from?" My mother stopped clapping and turned to me, her face hardening instantly. "Do not start, Renee. This is a lease. We have to keep up an image. Chantel is going to a private college in the fall. She cannot show up in a junker. People will talk. We have a reputation in this community." "But I sold my car for you," I whispered, tears stinging my eyes. "I am taking the bus, Mom. I am working double shifts." "Oh, stop being so dramatic," my mother snapped, waving her hand dismissively. "You are strong, Renee. You are a survivor. You can handle the bus. Chantel is different. She is delicate. She needs protection. Besides, it is her birthday. Stop being jealous of your sister. It is ugly." That word echoed in my head as I drove us closer to their house in the present day. Jealous. They always framed my demand for fairness as jealousy. They weaponized my strength against me. Because I could endure the bus, I was forced to take it. Because Chantel was useless and fragile, she was given a BMW. It was a pattern that had never broken. I was the mule, and she was the show pony. And now here I was, driving my own luxury car, paid for by my own success, about to walk into that same house to be treated like the help again. We turned onto their street. The houses here were large brick colonials with manicured lawns that cost more to maintain than most people made in a month. I saw my parents' driveway ahead. It was already full. There was my father's leased Lexus. There was Chantel's red convertible. And there was a massive black SUV that must have belonged to Brent's parents. There was no room for me in the driveway, just like there was no room for me at the table. I pulled my car to the curb, parking on the street like a visitor. My heart rate spiked. I looked at Maya. She was retying the ribbon on her hair, checking her reflection in the visor mirror nervously. "Do I look okay, Mom?" she asked, seeking validation. You look perfect, I said fiercely. I reached over and squeezed her hand. Maya, whatever happens in there, remember who you are. You are smart, you are kind, and you are mine. Nothing they say or do changes that. She smiled, but her eyes were anxious. She wanted the pearl. She wanted the acceptance it represented. I unclenched my hands from the steering wheel and took a deep breath. I checked my phone one last time. The banking app was open in the background. The digital copy of the deed to the house was saved in my favorites folder. I was walking into the lion's den, but this time I was not the sacrificial lamb. I was the hunter. I turned off the ignition and the silence of the car was replaced by the pounding of my own blood in my ears. Let us go see Grandma and Grandpa, I said, my voice steady and cold as ice. It is time to give them a Christmas they will never forget. The house stood at the end of the cul-de-sac, like a monument to suburban perfection. It was a sprawling two-story brick colonial with white pillars framing the entrance and a manicured lawn that was currently dusted with a light layer of frost. To the outside world, this residence was the home of Clarence and Wanda Johnson, a testament to their enduring success and place in the upper-middle-class society of Atlanta. Neighbors walking their dogs would nod respectfully at the property, admiring the fresh wreath on the door and the tasteful white lights lining the roof. But as I pulled my car to the curb, my stomach churned with a nauseating mix of pride and resentment, because I knew the truth that the neighbors did not. I knew that the mortgage payments, the property taxes, and even the insurance for this architectural masterpiece were drafted automatically from my bank account on the first of every month. Legally speaking, this was not my parents' house. It was my house. They were simply the tenants who had forgotten they were living on my charity. I put the car in park and took a moment to steel myself. Beside me, Maya was unbuckling her seatbelt, her earlier anxiety replaced by the sheer excitement of seeing her family. She did not see a battlefield, she saw a home. I wished I could borrow her vision for just one afternoon. I looked out the windshield and saw him. Brent. My sister's fiancé was standing on the front porch leaning against one of the white pillars I had paid to have repainted last summer. He looked like he had stepped out of a catalog for old money wannabes, wearing a cashmere sweater tied loosely around his shoulders, and sipping from a crystal tumbler that I recognized as part of my father's vintage collection. I opened the car door and the biting December air hit my face. I walked around to the trunk to start unloading the bags of groceries I had just purchased. Heavy bags filled with potatoes, carrots, and the expensive cuts of meat Chantel had demanded. I struggled to lift 3 canvas bags at once, the plastic handles digging into my palms. I looked up, expecting Brent to come down the steps to help. He was a man in his 30s, fit and capable, and he was watching me struggle with a look of mild amusement on his face. He took a slow sip of his drink and stayed exactly where he was. "Hey there, Renee," he called out, his voice carrying that grating tone of condescension he had mastered so well. "You know, I was just telling your dad that we really need to do something about your vehicle situation. That car of yours is looking a little tired. It is practically an eyesore next to my Lexus and your dad's car. You are ruining the aesthetic of the driveway." I paused, shifting the weight of the bags. My car was a 3-year-old Range Rover. It was muddy from the drive. And yes, it had a small dent in the rear bumper from a parking lot incident I had not had time to fix yet, but it was a luxury vehicle that I owned outright. Brent, on the other hand, drove a leased Lexus that he was likely 2 payments behind on given what I knew about his failing real estate career. But in this family, reality did not matter, only appearances did. "I am fine with my car, Brent," I said, keeping my voice level as I kicked the car door shut with my hip. "Are you going to give me a hand with these, or are you just going to supervise?" Brent chuckled, shaking his head as if I had told a cute joke. "I am in my hosting clothes, Renee," he said, smoothing the front of his pristine beige trousers. "I cannot risk getting road salt or dirt on this wool. Besides, you look like you have got it handled. You are used to heavy lifting, right? It is part of your job at the warehouse." He turned on his heel and walked back into the house, leaving the door open just wide enough for the heat to escape, but not wide enough for me to enter easily with my armload of groceries. I stood there for a second, blinded by a flash of pure rage. I wanted to drop the bags right there in the snow. I wanted to scream that the warehouse he mocked paid for the roof over his head. But then I felt Maya's small hand on my arm. "Let me help, Mama," she whispered, grabbing a lighter bag. I looked at her innocent face and swallowed my anger. I nodded and followed her up the steps of my own house, feeling like an intruder. We stepped into the foyer, and the smell hit me instantly. It was the scent of my childhood, a mix of cinnamon pine and my mother's expensive perfume. The house was decorated to perfection. Garlands of fresh evergreen wrapped around the banister of the grand staircase, and a 12-foot Christmas tree sparkled in the living room, adorned with glass ornaments that cost more than my first car. In the center of the room stood my mother, Wanda. She looked stunning in a floor-length emerald green silk dress, her hair coiffed into an elegant updo. She was laughing at something Chantel said, her hand resting lightly on my sister's shoulder. Grandma Maya squealed, dropping her bag by the door and running toward them, her arms wide open. She had not seen my mother in 2 months, and pure love radiated from her small body. "Stop right there," my mother's voice rang out sharp and commanding like a whip crack. Maya froze mid-stride, her smile faltering. My mother took a step back, holding her hands up defensively, as if Maya were a muddy dog about to jump on her. "Maya, honey, look at you," my mother said, her tone shifting to a strained sweetness. "But do not hug me yet. This is vintage silk, custom made. Your hands might be sticky from the car ride or wet from the snow. We cannot have you wrinkling me or staining the fabric before the guests arrive. You understand, do you not?" Maya slowly lowered her arms. She looked down at her hands. They were clean. She had washed them before we left, and she had not touched anything except her dress and the bag. I watched the light in her eyes dim. It was a subtle heartbreak, the kind that adults inflict on children without a second thought. Maya nodded quietly, stepping back. "Yes, Grandma, I am sorry." My mother did not even notice the hurt she had caused. She immediately turned her attention back to Chantel, who was lounging on the white sofa in a red velvet dress holding a glass of champagne. "Chantel, did you call the florist back about the centerpiece arrangements for the main table?" my mother asked, fussing with a stray lock of Chantel's hair. "You look gorgeous, darling. That red is definitely your color. It screams prosperity." I stood by the door holding 30 pounds of groceries, invisible to the woman who gave birth to me. "Hello, Mom," I said loudly, kicking the door shut behind me with a heavy thud. My mother glanced over at me, her eyes scanning my outfit with critical precision. I was wearing a simple black sweater and tailored trousers, practical for cooking but elegant enough for dinner. Her lip curled slightly. "Oh, Renee, you are here. Good. You are late, you know. The roast needs to be in the oven by now if we want it ready for Brent's parents. They eat promptly at 6. She did not say hello. She did not ask how the drive was. She did not thank me for the hundreds of dollars of food I was holding. She just pointed toward the back of the house. "Take those straight to the kitchen, and use the service entrance next time if you are going to bring wet bags into the foyer. You are dripping on the hardwood." I looked down. There were 3 tiny drops of melted snow on the floor. I looked back up at my mother, who was already pouring more champagne for Chantel. The contrast was so stark, it was almost comical. The golden child sat on a throne while the scapegoat was ordered to the scullery. I caught Brent watching me from the archway of the dining room, a smirk playing on his lips. He enjoyed this. He enjoyed seeing the successful business executive reduced to a servant in her parents' home. "Come on, Maya," I said, my voice tight. "Let us go to the kitchen." As we walked past the living room, I heard my mother whisper to Chantel, loud enough for me to hear. "I hope she did not buy the cheap cuts of meat. You know how she likes to cut corners to save a penny." I gritted my teeth, my jaw aching from the pressure. I tightened my grip on the bag containing the $200 roast I had paid for. I walked into the kitchen, the swinging door closing behind me, shutting out the laughter and the warmth, leaving me in the cold, white, sterile space where they believed I belonged. But as I set the bags down on the granite counter, I had selected and paid for 5 years ago, I made a silent vow. This was the last meal I would ever cook for them. The service entrance was about to become the only entrance they would ever use when they came begging for my help. The swinging door settled into its frame with a soft thud, sealing me inside the kitchen and effectively cutting off the warmth of the holiday gathering. The silence in the room was heavy and immediate, a stark contrast to the crescendo of laughter and clinking crystal that vibrated through the walls from the living room. I stood there for a moment, letting the isolation wash over me. This kitchen was a space I knew intimately, not because I enjoyed cooking, but because it was the only place in this house where my parents seemed to tolerate my presence for extended periods. It was a beautiful kitchen with granite countertops I had paid to install and stainless steel appliances I had selected from a high-end catalog 3 years ago. Yet standing here now, I did not feel like the owner of this luxury. I felt like the staff hired to maintain it. I reached for the hook behind the pantry door and pulled down the apron that seemed to be permanently assigned to me. It was a faded floral print with a frayed hem that smelled faintly of old grease and stale onions. Putting it on felt like a demotion. In the warehouse, I wore a tailored blazer and a security badge that opened every door. Here I was wrapping myself in the uniform of the help, covering my silk blouse with a garment that marked me as the one who serves. I tied the strings behind my back, feeling them cut slightly into my waist, and turned my attention to the $200 prime rib sitting on the counter. I began to prep the meat, massaging the expensive cut with herbs and truffle oil, just the way Chantel had demanded. My hands moved with the precision of a surgeon, but my mind was drifting toward the party I was excluded from. I could hear the muffled baritone of my father telling one of his exaggerated golf stories. I heard the high-pitched, tinkling laugh of my sister, the sound she reserved for impressing people she thought could elevate her status. And I heard the confident, booming voice of Brent holding court in a house he had not contributed a single dime to maintain. They were celebrating the season of giving, while the person who gave them everything was tasked with scrubbing potatoes in the back room. The kitchen door pushed open, and my mother breezed in. She did not bring an offer of assistance. She brought a gust of her heavy floral perfume and a critical eye that scanned the countertops for any sign of disorder. She held her empty champagne flute like a scepter, tapping her manicured nails against the glass. "Renee, are you watching the temperature on that oven?" she asked without looking at me. She walked over to the stove, peering suspiciously at the digital display as if I might be plotting to sabotage the meal. "Remember what I told you. Medium rare. Strictly medium rare." Brent's parents are very sophisticated people, Renee. They travel to Europe every summer. They know good food. If you overcook this and make it tough, it will reflect poorly on all of us. We cannot look like we do not know how to handle a premium roast. I continued chopping carrots, my knife hitting the wooden board with a rhythmic, aggressive cadence. "I know how to cook a roast, Mom," I said, keeping my eyes on the blade. "I have been cooking every holiday meal for this family since I was 22. You do not need to micromanage me." Wanda sighed a long, dramatic exhalation that suggested my competence was a burden she had to endure. "I am just ensuring quality control. You know how you get distracted sometimes with your work emails and your stress. Today is about focus. It is about presentation. Speaking of which, try to keep this counter wiped down. We might bring Mrs. Anderson in here later to show her the custom cabinetry, and I do not want her seeing vegetable peels everywhere. It looks low class." She ran a finger along the granite, checking for dust, then turned to leave. She did not ask if I needed a drink. She did not ask if I was hungry. She did not ask if I wanted to come out and say hello to the guests before the cooking got intense. She simply issued her orders and turned her back. As she pushed the swinging door open to return to the festivities, I caught a glimpse of the living room through the widening gap. The scene was bathed in the warm, golden glow of the fireplace and the twinkling lights of the Christmas tree. It looked like a Norman Rockwell painting, if Rockwell painted bougie families living on credit. But what caught my eye and made my hand freeze mid-chop was Brent. He was sitting in the large leather armchair, the one that used to be my grandfather's favorite. He looked entirely at home, laughing at something his father was saying. And there, resting squarely on the mahogany coffee table, were his feet. He was wearing shoes. Not just socks, but heavy brown loafers with hard soles. And he had propped them up right on the delicate polished surface of the table I had bought for my father for his 60th birthday. That table was an antique reproduction I had shipped from Charleston. It cost $1,200. I remembered how my father had gushed over it, how he had promised to keep it pristine using coasters and special polish. And now he was sitting right there watching this man, this mediocre real estate agent, treat it like a footrest at a dive bar. My father said nothing, said. My mother said nothing. They were so desperate to please Brent's family, so desperate to be accepted by these people, that they allowed him to trample on their furniture, just as they allowed him to trample on their daughter. The door swung shut, cutting off the view, but the image was burned into my retinas. The disrespect was physical. It was tangible. It was a shoe on a mahogany table. I looked down at the prime rib, the meat that was worth more than my sister's weekly paycheck. I felt the heat rising in the small kitchen. It was not just the oven preheating to 400 degrees, it was the heat of a fire that had been smoldering for decades, finally finding enough oxygen to roar. I picked up the roasting pan, my grip tightening on the metal handles. They wanted a perfect meal. They wanted service. They wanted to pretend they were royalty, while I remained the invisible engine keeping their fantasy running. I slid the meat into the oven and slammed the door shut with a force that rattled the spice rack. Enjoy the appetizers, I whispered to the empty room, because the main course comes with a side of reality you are not ready to swallow. The doorbell chimed, a melodic two-note sound that echoed through the house like a gavel striking a judge's podium. In the kitchen, the sound made my mother freeze mid-stride. She whipped her head around, her eyes wide with a mixture of panic and desperation that would have been funny if it were not so pathetic. "They are here," she hissed at me. "Renee, do not come out until the appetizers are perfectly plated, and for God's sake, take off that apron if you are going to walk through the dining room. We do not want you looking like you just scrubbed a pot, even though that is exactly what you are doing." She smoothed her silk dress, took a deep breath, and pasted a bright artificial smile onto her face before pushing through the swinging door to greet our guests. I stayed behind, listening to the muffled sounds of greetings in the foyer. The voices were loud and performative. I heard my father's booming laugh, the one he used when he was trying to sell an insurance package to a skeptical client. I heard Chantel's high-pitched giggle, and then I heard new voices. The first was a woman's voice, sharp and nasally, carrying the unmistakable cadence of someone who is used to complaining to managers. "Oh, Wanda, your home is just delightful. A bit smaller than the photos Brent showed us, but very cozy." That was Eleanor, Brent's mother. Even in her compliment there was a barb, a subtle reminder that she considered herself above this tax bracket. Then came Richard, Brent's father, his voice gruff and loud. "Nice driveway, Clarence, though I noticed the pavement is cracking a bit near the garage. You ought to get that looked at before the frost heave makes it worse." I stood over the kitchen island, arranging bacon-wrapped scallops onto a silver platter. My hands were steady, but my blood was boiling. The driveway was cracking because I had refused to pay for the resurfacing last month, telling my father it was his responsibility to maintain the property I let him live in rent-free. Clearly he had spent that money on something else, likely the case of expensive scotch I saw sitting on the bar cart. I took a deep breath. I was a professional. I negotiated contracts with hostile union leaders and navigated supply chain crises that threatened millions of dollars in inventory. I could handle 2 judgmental retirees from Connecticut. I smoothed my black sweater, checked my reflection in the microwave door, and picked up the heavy silver platter. It was time to play my part. I pushed the door open with my hip and stepped into the living room. The scene before me was a masterclass in social posturing. My parents and Chantel were clustered around the newcomers like moths drawn to a very dim flame. Eleanor was a petite woman with stiff helmet-like blonde hair, wearing a beige cashmere set that looked expensive from a distance but pilled up close. Richard was a large man with a red face squeezed into a blazer that was slightly too tight across the shoulders. They were not the Rockefellers my mother made them out to be. They were simply people with a little bit of money and a lot of audacity. "Ah, here are the hors d'oeuvres," my father announced, gesturing toward me with a grand sweep of his hand. I walked toward the group, the silver platter heavy in my hands. I approached Eleanor first, offering her the tray with a polite smile. "Good evening," I said, my voice professional and warm. "I am Renee. It is nice to meet you." Eleanor did not look at my face. She did not look at my eyes. Her gaze went straight to the scallops, then to my hands, then to my plain black outfit. She picked up a scallop with a napkin, popping it into her mouth, while continuing to look past me toward the Christmas tree. Tasty," she mumbled. Then she turned slightly toward me, extending her empty glass without making eye contact. "Honey, could you be a dear and get me some more ice? This Chardonnay is tepid. And while you are at it, bring a few napkins for Richard. He is making a mess." The room went dead silent. The air was sucked out of the space, leaving a vacuum filled only by the crackling of the fire. Eleanor had just mistaken me, the homeowner, the breadwinner, the vice president of operations, for the hired help. She assumed that because I was holding a tray and wearing black, I was there to serve her. I stood frozen, the silver platter trembling slightly in my hands. I looked at Brent. He was standing right next to his mother, sipping his drink. He knew exactly who I was. He knew I paid the heating bill, keeping his mother warm. He knew I paid for the wine she was drinking. A smirk played on his lips. He said nothing. I looked at my father, Clarence Johnson. The man who had raised me looked down at his shoes, suddenly finding the pattern of the Persian rug fascinating. I looked at my mother. Wanda was gripping her champagne glass so hard I thought it might shatter. Her eyes darted between me and Eleanor, terrified that the illusion of their perfect, wealthy life was about to shatter. Finally, I looked at Chantel, my sister, the girl I had tutored in math, the girl whose tuition I had helped pay. This was her moment. All she had to say was, "Oh, Eleanor, this is my sister Renee. She is just helping us out because she is wonderful." Chantel cleared her throat. She smiled, a tight, nervous smile that did not reach her eyes. She looked at Eleanor, then at me, and made her choice. "Oh, yes," Chantel said, her voice light and breezy. "She just loves being in the kitchen. We honestly cannot keep her out of there. Just let her know if you need anything else, Eleanor. She is happy to serve." The betrayal hit me harder than a physical blow. It was a visceral, sharp pain in the center of my chest. She had denied me. She had reduced me to a servant in my own home to save face in front of these strangers. She had chosen the approval of a woman she just met over the dignity of the sister who had carried her for years. Eleanor smiled, oblivious to the knife that had just been twisted in my back. "Oh, that is wonderful. Good help is so hard to find these days, isn't it? Well, chop chop, dear." The ice. I looked at Chantel one last time. I wanted to throw the platter of scallops onto the white carpet. I wanted to scream that I owned the chair she was sitting in. I wanted to pull out my phone and show Eleanor my bank balance, which I guaranteed was higher than hers. But I did not. Not yet. The anger that flooded my veins was not hot and explosive. It was cold. It was liquid nitrogen. It clarified everything. I realized in that moment that I did not have a family. I had a group of parasites who had attached themselves to my success and were now feeding on my self-respect. I slowly lowered the tray to the coffee table, setting it down right next to Brent's feet. I straightened my spine, rising to my full height. My face was a mask of stone. "Of course," I said, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. "I will get that ice for you right away." I turned on my heel and walked back toward the kitchen. I could feel their eyes on my back. I heard Richard chuckle. "She is a quiet one, isn't she? I like that. Keeps her head down and works." I pushed through the swinging door and let it close behind me. The moment I was alone, I grabbed the edge of the granite counter, my knuckles turning white as I squeezed the cold stone. My breath came in ragged gasps. I looked at the knife block. I looked at the carving knife I would need for the roast. Chantel had said I was happy to serve. Fine. I would serve them. I would serve them a Christmas dinner they would never forget. I would serve them the finest meal of their lives. And then for dessert, I would serve them the consequences of every single lie they had just told. I walked over to the freezer and scooped a cup of ice. I stared at the cubes glittering under the kitchen lights. They were hard cold and unyielding, just like me. I was done being the daughter. I was done being the sister. Tonight I was the landlord. And the eviction process was about to begin. The transition from the kitchen to the main hallway signaled that the performance was about to begin. I carried the heavy platter of prime rib, the meat resting in a pool of rich rosemary juice that I had spent 3 hours reducing. The aroma was intoxicating, filling the entire lower level of the house with the scent of expensive comfort. As I walked toward the dining room, I could see the scene my mother had curated. It was undeniably beautiful. The crystal chandelier, which I had paid to have cleaned and rewired just last month, cast a fractured diamond light over the table. The long mahogany dining table was set for 6. There were chargers of gold leaf fine-bone china plates and crystal wine glasses that sparkled like jewelry. The centerpiece was a cascading arrangement of red roses and winter greenery that probably cost more than my first semester's tuition. Everyone was already seated. My father sat at the head of the table looking regal and pleased with himself as he poured a vintage Cabernet for Richard. Eleanor was touching the linen napkins, admiring the thread count. Brent and Chantel sat side by side, looking like a magazine cover of a couple who had never worked a hard day in their lives. There were 2 empty chairs at the far end of the table. My heart lifted slightly. Perhaps I had been wrong. Perhaps the text message had been a cruel joke or a mistake. Perhaps in the spirit of Christmas, my mother had realized that excluding her eldest daughter and only grandchild was a bridge too far, even for her. I approached the table holding the roast ready to set it down on the trivet in the center. "Here we are," I said, forcing a smile. "Prime rib cooked exactly to medium rare." "Wonderful," Wanda said, clapping her hands lightly. "It looks edible, Renee." "Thank you." I placed the meat down and straightened up, looking toward the empty chairs. "Come on, Maya," I called out softly to my daughter, who was standing awkwardly in the archway, clutching her iPad to her chest. "Come sit down, baby." Before Maya could take a step, my mother was out of her chair. She moved with a speed that defied her age, intercepting us like a Secret Service agent protecting a president. "Oh, wait, just a moment," she said, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper as she placed a hand on my arm. She steered me away from the table, turning my body back toward the kitchen hallway. "Those chairs are for our coats and bags, dear," she said, loud enough for the table to hear, but quiet enough to sound polite. "You know how cluttered the foyer gets. Besides, we want everyone to be comfortable." She kept walking us past the dining room, past the warmth of the fire, and past the inclusion I had momentarily hoped for. She guided us toward the door that led to the garage. This was the mudroom. It was a utility space designed for muddy boots, wet umbrellas, and the hum of the washing machine. It was not a room for dining. It was a room for transition, a place you passed through to get to the real house. Wanda opened the door and gestured inside with a flourish, as if she were unveiling a VIP suite. There, pushed against the wall next to a stack of my father's golf clubs, was a small white plastic folding table. It was the kind of table you buy at a discount store for a garage sale or a children's lemonade stand. It wobbled slightly on the tiled floor. On top of it were 2 paper plates, not the fine china, paper, and plastic forks. "Look how cozy this is," Wanda said, beaming. "It is perfect for you two. It is quiet, so you will not be bored by all the adult talk about politics and real estate. Maya can watch her little cartoons on her iPad as loud as she wants without disturbing Mr. and Mrs. Anderson. And you, Renee, you can relax. You do not have to worry about serving or clearing. You can just be." I stared at the table. The air in the mudroom was significantly colder than the rest of the house. The draft from the garage door seeped through the cracks. The smell here was not of roasting meat and wine, but of laundry detergent and cold rubber. Mom, I said, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. You want us to eat Christmas dinner in the laundry room. I paid for the dining room table. I paid for the food on it. And you are putting us next to the cat litter box. Wanda's smile vanished, instantly replaced by that cold steel look she reserved for when I challenged her authority. Lower your voice, Renee, she hissed, checking over her shoulder to ensure the guests had not heard. Do not ruin this. Brent's parents are very traditional. They believe children should be seen and not heard. And frankly, you do not fit the dynamic at the main table tonight. We are discussing business and club memberships. You would feel out of place. This is for your own comfort. Now stop being ungrateful and sit down. The food will get cold. She turned and walked back to the dining room, closing the door firmly behind her. The click of the latch sounded like a prison cell locking. The muffled sounds of laughter and the clinking of silverware resumed immediately. They had moved on. We had been erased. I stood there staring at the closed door, my fists clenched at my sides. I wanted to kick the door down. I wanted to flip the expensive table over. But then I felt a tug on my sleeve. I looked down. Maya was standing there in her navy blue velvet dress with the white lace collar. She had spent an hour curling her hair this morning. She had put on her shiny patent leather shoes. She looked like a little princess who had been promised a ball and delivered to a dungeon. She looked up at me with large, watery eyes. Her bottom lip trembled. Mom, she whispered, her voice shaking. Why can we not sit with them? I knelt down so I was eye level with her, ignoring the cold tile on my knees. Because they are confused, baby, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. They made a mistake. Maya shook her head, a tear spilling over and tracking down her cheek. No, Mom. It is because I am dirty, isn't it? That is why Grandma did not want to hug me. And now she put us in the mudroom because this is where the dirty boots go. But I showered, Mom. I scrubbed really hard. I put on my best dress. Why am I still not clean enough for them? The sound of my own heart breaking was louder than the washing machine would have been. My daughter, my innocent, beautiful, brilliant child, thought she was being segregated because she was unclean. She thought her worth was tied to her hygiene, not to the toxic elitism of the people in the other room. I pulled her into my arms, burying my face in her hair. No, baby, no. You are spotless. You are perfect. You are the cleanest, brightest thing in this entire house. They are the ones who are dirty, Maya. Their hearts are dirty. I held her tight, rocking her slightly as she cried silently into my shoulder. Over her head I glared at the plastic table and the paper plates. I looked at the door that separated us from the feast I had prepared. The sadness in my chest began to harden. It calcified rapidly, turning from grief into something heavy and dangerous. I stood up and wiped Maya's tears with my thumbs. I picked up the paper plates and threw them into the trash bin. Sit down, Maya, I said, my voice low and terrifyingly calm. Open your iPad. Watch whatever you want. Turn the volume up all the way. Are we going to eat, Mom? She asked, sniffing. No, I said, pulling my phone out of my pocket. We are not eating their leftovers. But do not worry, we are not staying in this room for long, and when we leave, we are taking the house with us. I unlocked my phone and opened the folder labeled Legal Documents. My thumb hovered over the file named Eviction Notice Draft. I had prepared it months ago as a worst-case scenario, a nuclear option I never thought I would use. But looking at my daughter sitting next to a pile of dirty laundry while strangers ate the food she helped buy, I realized the nuclear option was the only option left. Eat up, everyone, I whispered to the closed door. Savor every bite, because it is going to choke you when the bill comes due. The heavy silver platter burned my forearms through the thick oven mitts as I carried the prime rib back into the dining room. The meat was a masterpiece of culinary execution. A perfectly seared crust encased the tender pink center, and the scent of rosemary, garlic, and rich beef tallow instantly overpowered the delicate floral arrangement on the table. This was a meal fit for royalty, a meal that would cost hundreds of dollars at the finest steakhouse in Atlanta. And I was delivering it to a table of people who viewed me as nothing more than a delivery mechanism. I approached the head of the table where my father sat, but before I could set the platter down, Brent stood up. He did not stand to help me with the heavy load. He stood to claim the moment. He reached out and took the carving knife and fork from the table, holding them aloft like weapons of war. "Allow me," he announced, his voice booming with unearned authority. "A roast this fine requires a firm hand to carve." I set the platter down on the trivet, my hands shaking slightly from the strain. I took a step back, clasping my hands in front of me, waiting for a thank you, waiting for someone to say, "Pull up a chair, Renee," waiting for a single crumb of acknowledgement that I was a human being and not a kitchen appliance. Brent sliced into the meat. The knife slid through the beef like it was butter, revealing the perfect medium-rare center my mother had demanded. A collective murmur of appreciation went around the table. Eleanor adjusted her glasses to get a better look. Richard nodded approvingly, tapping his finger on the tablecloth. "Now, that is what I call dinner," Richard grunted. "Good color. Not too bloody, not too dry. Hard to get that right in a home oven." Brent placed a thick slab of meat onto his father's plate, then served his mother before serving my parents. Finally, he served Chantel, giving her the choicest cut from the center. He did not serve me. He did not even look at me. He just continued to carve, placing a piece on his own plate before setting the knife down with a satisfied clatter. He took a bite, chewing slowly with his eyes closed, as if he were a judge on a cooking show. He swallowed and turned to Chantel, a wide grin on his face. "Babe, you have outdone yourself," he said, raising his wineglass in her direction. "I know you did not cook it yourself, but you sure know how to hire the right people. You have got a real knack for management. Finding someone who can execute a menu like this is a skill in itself." Chantel preened, fluffing her hair and resting her hand on his arm. "Well, you know me, Brent. I have very high standards. I had to be very specific with her about the temperature and the seasoning. I do not let the help cut corners. If you want the best, you have to demand the best." The help. She called her own sister the help. I stood there near the sideboard, invisible in plain sight. My mother was busy pouring gravy over her potatoes. My father was already eating, oblivious to everything but his stomach. I cleared my throat softly. Just a small sound to remind them I existed. To remind them that the person who paid for the meat, the wine, the table, and the roof was standing 3 feet away, watching them eat her investment. My mother looked up. Her eyes were glazed over with wine and self-satisfaction. She waved her fork at me dismissively. "Oh, Renee," she said, her mouth half full. "That will be all for now. You can go check on Maya. Make sure she is not watching anything too violent on that iPad. And close the door tight when you go out. There is a draft coming from the mudroom and it is making Eleanor's ankles cold." That was it. No plate. No offer of leftovers. Just a dismissal. I felt a cold numbness spread from my chest to my fingertips. It was the anesthesia of absolute detachment. I nodded once, a slow, mechanical movement. "Enjoy your meal, everyone," I said, my voice flat. I turned and walked away. The sound of their utensils scraping against the fine bone china followed me like applause for a performance I was no longer starring in. I reached the door to the mudroom and paused. I could hear Brent laughing at something his father said. I could hear the warmth, the camaraderie, the family unit that had successfully excised its cancerous tumor, which apparently was me. I opened the door and stepped into the chill of the utility room. The air here was 10 degrees colder than the dining room. The hum of the extra refrigerator and the faint smell of bleach replaced the aroma of the roast. I closed the door behind me, sealing the warmth away. Maya was sitting at the plastic folding table. She still had her headphones on, but one ear cup was pushed back so she could hear me come in. She looked up and my heart shattered into a million jagged pieces. On the flimsy paper plate in front of her was not a slice of the prime rib. It was not the truffle mashed potatoes or the glazed heirloom carrots I had spent hours preparing. It was 2 pieces of cold fried chicken, leftovers from the lunch my parents had eaten yesterday. My mother had not even bothered to heat them up. Beside the chicken was a small scoop of store-bought potato salad and a juice box. Maya saw me looking at her plate. She quickly wiped her mouth with a paper napkin and sat up straighter, trying to look brave, trying to protect me from the hurt she knew I was feeling. "It is okay, Mom," she said, forcing a bright smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I actually like cold chicken. It is like a picnic. And Grandma said the roast was spicy, so I probably would not have liked it anyway." I walked over to the table and pulled out the metal folding chair next to her. The legs scraped loudly against the tile floor, a harsh sound in the small room. I sat down and looked at my daughter. She was eating garbage in a laundry room while wearing a velvet dress. She was making excuses for the people who treated her like a nuisance. I reached out and brushed a crumb from her cheek. "You know that is not true, Maya," I whispered. "You love roast beef, and you hate cold chicken." Maya dropped her gaze to her plate, picking at the breading on a drumstick. Her shoulders slumped and the brave mask slipped just a fraction. "Why do they hate us, Mom?" she asked quietly. "Is it because we do not have a dad? Is it because we are not fancy like Brent?" "No," I said, my voice hardening into stone. "It is because they are small people, Maya. Small people need to make others feel small, so they can feel big. But they made a mistake today. A very big mistake." I looked at the closed door leading back to the house. I could imagine them in there wiping their mouths with linen napkins, toasting to their good fortune. They thought they had won. They thought they had successfully put me in my place. They thought I would sit here in the cold, eat my scraps, and be grateful for the privilege of being in their orbit. But they had forgotten who held the gravity in this solar system. "I am not hungry, Mom," Maya said, pushing her plate away. "Can we just go home, please?" I looked at the time on my phone. It was almost time for the gift exchange, the final act of this grotesque play. "Not yet, baby," I said, standing up. "We have one more thing to do. Grandpa has not given out the gifts yet, and I think you need to be there for that." "But Grandma said—" "I do not care what Grandma said." I interrupted, my voice sharp with a new authority. "This is my house, Maya, not hers. And you are going to walk out there with your head high. You are going to watch them show exactly who they are one last time. And then we are going to burn their little kingdom to the ground. Come on." I held out my hand. Maya took it. Her hand was small and warm in mine. I squeezed it tight, drawing strength from her innocence and fueling my resolve with her pain. I opened the door to the mudroom. The warm air rushed in, carrying the sounds of dessert being served. They were laughing again. Good. Let them laugh. It would make the silence that was coming all the more deafening. We stepped out of the shadows and back into the light, walking toward the living room for the grand finale. The transition from the laundry room back to the living room was like stepping from a freezer into a furnace. The air was thick with the scent of pine needles and expensive cologne, and the temperature was stiflingly warm from the roaring fire. Maya squeezed my hand so hard her knuckles turned white, but she held her head high just like I had told her to. We took our places near the back of the room, standing by the archway like spectators at a show we had not bought tickets for. The family was gathered in a semicircle around the 12-foot Christmas tree, which was now buried under a mountain of wrapping paper and ribbons. Everyone was in high spirits. The wine had done its work, loosening tongues and flushing cheeks. My mother Wanda was lounging on the sofa next to Eleanor, laughing a little too loudly at a joke that wasn't funny. Chantel was sitting on the floor, leaning against Brent's legs, posing for yet another photo for her social media feed, holding up a new designer handbag she had just unwrapped. They looked like the picture-perfect family, the kind you see in commercials selling diamonds or life insurance. And once again, we were the dark smudge in the corner of the frame. "All right, everyone, settle down." "Settle down, my father," Clarence bellowed, clapping his hands together. He stood in front of the fireplace, holding a glass of cognac in one hand and looking very pleased with himself. He loved this part of the night. He loved being the patriarch, the provider, the man who bestowed gifts upon his subjects. It was his favorite performance. "We have opened a lot of wonderful things tonight," he began, his voice booming. "Designer bags, golf clubs, cashmere scarves. We are truly blessed. But you know, in the Johnson family, we believe that the most important gifts aren't the ones you buy at the mall. They are the ones that carry our history, our legacy." Maya stiffened beside me. I felt a tremor run through her small body. She looked up at me, her eyes wide and luminous with hope. She knew what was coming. We both did. For 3 years, my father had told her the story of great-grandmother Rose's pearls, how she had bought them with money she saved from sewing dresses in the 1950s, how she had worn them to church every Sunday, how they represented dignity and grace, and how on her 12th Christmas, every Johnson girl received them as a rite of passage. Maya turned 12 last month. This was her moment. This was the apology for the mudroom. This was the bridge back to belonging. Clarence reached behind the tree and pulled out a small square box. My heart stopped. It was the box. The faded navy blue velvet was worn at the corners, and I recognized the gold hinge that had been slightly bent for decades. It was the only thing of real value my parents had kept, not monetary value but sentimental weight. I saw Maya's breath hitch. She took a tiny, unconscious step forward, drawn by the gravity of her heritage. She let go of my hand, ready to step into the circle, ready to be claimed. "This gift," my father said, holding the box up to the light, "is very special. It has been in our family for 4 generations. It represents purity, class, and the welcoming of new chapters." He paused for dramatic effect, looking around the room. His eyes swept over Maya. For a split second I thought I saw a flicker of hesitation, a ghost of a conscience. But then his gaze moved past her, landing on the oversized armchair where Brent's brother and his wife were sitting. Between them sat a bored-looking girl with blonde pigtails playing on a Nintendo Switch. "Sophie," my father called out with a warm, welcoming smile. "Come here, sweetheart. Grandpa Clarence has something for you." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a vacuum sealing. It was the sound of my blood freezing in my veins. Maya stopped. She did not breathe. She did not blink. She just stood there, one foot slightly forward, frozen in a posture of rejected anticipation. Sophie, the 10-year-old niece of my sister's fiancé, looked up from her game. She looked confused. "Me?" she asked, pointing to her chest. "Yes, you." My father beamed, beckoning her forward. "Come on now, do not be shy." Sophie slid off the chair and walked over to him. She was wearing a red tartan dress that probably cost more than my car insurance. She looked at the old velvet box with mild curiosity, nothing more. She did not know who great-grandmother Rose was. She did not know about the sewing money. She did not know that pearls were a promise. My father knelt down on one knee, groaning slightly with the effort. "Sophie, getting to know you and your family over the last few months has been such a joy. When Brent marries Chantel, we are all becoming one big family. And in the Johnson house, we like to make sure our new daughters feel just as special as our old ones." He opened the box. The single pearl on the delicate gold chain shimmered in the firelight. It was modest by modern standards, but it was sacred. "I want you to have this," my father said, taking the necklace out, "to welcome you, to show you that you are a Johnson now too." "No." The word escaped my lips before I could stop it. It was a strangled whisper, but in the quiet room it sounded like a gunshot. My mother whipped her head around, her eyes narrowing into slits. "Renee," she mouthed a warning, silent and deadly. But it was too late. My father was already fastening the clasp around Sophie's neck. The gold chain settled against her pale skin. It looked alien there. It looked stolen. Sophie looked down at it and shrugged. "Thanks," she said flatly. "It is kinda small, though." Laughter rippled through the room. Uncomfortable, relieved laughter. "Oh, she is so honest," Eleanor chuckled, sipping her wine. "Children say the darndest things. Thank you, Clarence. That is such a sweet gesture. Very welcoming of you. My father stood up beaming at the praise. He had successfully bought the approval of his wealthy in-laws using his own granddaughter's birthright as currency. He patted Sophie on the head. You are welcome, sweetie. Now go show your mom. Sophie ran back to her parents, the necklace bouncing against her chest. Maya stood rooted to the spot. The light had gone out of her eyes. It wasn't just sadness. It was a profound, shattering realization. She had been replaced. She had been erased. The one thing that proved she was part of this family had been given to a stranger, a white child they had known for 8 weeks, simply to impress her parents. I looked at my father. He was avoiding my gaze, busy pouring himself another drink. I looked at my mother. She was studiously adjusting a bow on a gift box, refusing to look at the devastation she had helped orchestrate. I looked at Chantel. She was typing on her phone, probably posting about the touching moment. The rage that had been cold in the kitchen ignited into a white-hot supernova. This was not about a necklace. This was about value. They valued the appearance of proximity to whiteness and wealth more than they valued their own flesh and blood. They had sacrificed Maya's heart on the altar of their social climbing. Maya turned to me slowly. She did not cry. She looked too tired to cry. She looked like a 40-year-old woman trapped in a child's body who had just learned that the world is a cruel transactional place. Can we go now, Mom? She whispered. I do not want my gift. I looked at the pile of generic gifts under the tree marked for Maya. Probably a sweater. Maybe a book. Things bought without thought, without love. Yes, baby. I said, my voice vibrating with the intensity of the earthquake that was about to hit this house. We are going, but not before I give them my gift. I reached into my pocket and wrapped my fingers around my phone. The screen was cool against my sweating palm. I stepped forward, moving out of the shadows and into the center of the room. My movement was sudden and aggressive enough that the chatter died down. Renee, where are you going? My mother asked, annoyed. We haven't finished the gifts. I am finished, Mom, I said. I walked right up to the Christmas tree, standing between my father and his guests. I looked at Sophie playing with the pearl necklace. Then I looked at Brent. Then I looked at my parents. I looked at them with the clarity of a predator who has finally decided to stop eating grass and start eating meat. Actually, I announced, my voice projecting to the back of the room, clear and steady. I have one last surprise for everyone. Since we are in the spirit of giving away things that belong to other people, I thought I would share something too. I held up my phone. The black screen reflected the twinkling lights of the tree. It looked like a detonator, and in a way it was. Brent, you asked earlier about my car, I said, locking eyes with him. You said it was bringing down the property value. Well, I have good news. You won't have to look at it anymore. My mother stood up, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. Her face went pale. Renee, what are you doing? Stop this right now. But I was not stopping. The train had left the station and it was carrying a payload of dynamite. I tapped the screen. The AirPlay icon glowed blue. I think it is time we all learned exactly who owns what in this house, I said. And with one tap, I cast my phone screen to the 65-inch television mounted above the fireplace, turning their cozy holiday backdrop into a courtroom exhibit. The silence that followed my father's betrayal was shattered by a sound that tore through my chest like a physical blow. It was the sound of my daughter's heart breaking in real time. Maya did not just cry, she wailed. It was a primal sound of absolute devastation, a rejection so deep it scraped the bottom of her soul. She took a step forward, her small hands balling into fists at her sides, her face crumpling into a mask of pure anguish. That is mine, she screamed, her voice cracking on the last word. That is mine, Grandpa promised. He promised me. The room erupted into chaos. The polite veneer of the holiday gathering dissolved instantly. Eleanor recoiled, clutching her pearls as if Maya were a feral animal attacking her. Richard frowned, setting his drink down with a heavy thud. Sophie, the girl wearing my daughter's birthright, looked scared and took a step back behind her mother. But it was my family's reaction that turned my shock into a cold, hard resolve. Chantel was the first to react. She did not kneel down to comfort her niece. She did not look at her father with confusion or anger for what he had done. She looked at Maya with pure, unadulterated disgust. She stood up so fast her chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. "Maya, stop it right now," Chantel shouted, stomping her foot like a petulant teenager. "You are being completely ridiculous. Stop screaming. You are embarrassing me in front of Brent's family." Maya looked at her aunt, her eyes swimming with tears. "But Aunt Chantel," she sobbed, pointing a shaking finger at Sophie. "That is Great-Grandma Rose's necklace. Mommy told me about it." Grandpa said. "I do not care what Grandpa said," Chantel interrupted, her voice shrill and piercing. "Sophie is a guest. Sophie is family now. You are being selfish and greedy. It is just a necklace, Maya. My God, Renee cannot afford to buy you jewelry, so now you have to ruin my engagement dinner over a cheap pearl. Grow up." The accusation hung in the air, toxic and false. But before I could open my mouth, my mother moved. Wanda, who had claimed she didn't want to wrinkle her dress earlier, now had no problem grabbing my sobbing daughter by the arm. Her grip was tight, too tight. She dug her manicured nails into Maya's velvet sleeve, pulling her away from the center of the room as if she were taking out the trash. "That is enough," Wanda hissed, her face contorted in anger. "I knew we shouldn't have let you come out of the mudroom. You clearly do not know how to behave in polite society. Look at you. You are making a scene. You are upsetting Sophie." "Grandma, please," Maya begged, trying to pull her arm free. "It is mine. It is nobody's until we say so," Wanda snapped. "And right now, you are acting like a spoiled brat. I will not have you ruining this night for your sister. Get out!" Wanda dragged her toward the front door. Not back to the mudroom, but to the front door. "Go sit in the car," she ordered, opening the heavy oak door and letting the freezing December wind blast into the hallway. "Here are the keys. Go sit in your mother's car and wait there until we are done. If you cannot act like a lady, you will not stay in this house." "But it is freezing," Maya cried, shivering as the cold air hit her tear-stained face. "Turn the heat on then," Wanda said, shoving the keys into Maya's hand. "Just get out of my sight, and do not come back in until you are ready to apologize to everyone, especially Sophie." My mother pushed my 12-year-old daughter out into the dark and slammed the door shut. The heavy thud echoed through the house, sealing the rejection. Maya was gone, banished for the crime of wanting the love she was promised. Wanda smoothed her dress, took a deep breath, and turned back to the room with a practiced apologetic smile. "I am so sorry, everyone," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "You know how children are at that age. So emotional. Renee has always been a bit lax with discipline. We try our best, but, well, you know." She trailed off, casting a disparaging look in my direction. The implication was clear. Maya was broken because I was a bad mother. The room exhaled. Brent picked up his drink again. Eleanor whispered something to Richard, and they both nodded, looking at me with pity and judgment. "Renee, maybe you should go check on her," Brent suggested lazily, leaning back in his chair. "She seems a little unstable, probably gets it from her father, whoever he is." He laughed, a short, cruel chuckle. Chantel giggled along with him. That was the moment. That was the exact millisecond when the Renee they knew died. The dutiful daughter who paid the bills and cooked the food and cleaned the messes vanished. The sister who stepped aside so the golden child could shine ceased to exist. I sat there for one heartbeat longer, staring at the closed front door, where my baby was crying alone in the cold. I felt a physical shift in my body. My heart rate slowed down. The heat of embarrassment evaporated, leaving behind a clarity so sharp it felt like a blade in my mind. I did not run after Maya. If I went out there now, I would just be the defeated mother comforting her child in exile. I would be accepting their narrative. I would be fleeing. No, I was not leaving. Not yet. I stood up. I moved slowly, deliberately. My chair did not scrape. I smoothed the front of my black sweater. I picked up my phone from the table. Renee, where are you going? Wanda asked, her tone warning. If you are going to get her, leave her be for a few minutes. She needs to think about her actions. I ignored her. I walked past the dining table. I walked past the Christmas tree. I walked until I was standing in the exact center of the room, directly in front of the fireplace, blocking their view of the television, blocking the warmth of the fire. I stood there silent and still. I looked at Brent, who was swirling his scotch. I looked at Chantel, who was checking her makeup in her compact mirror. I looked at my father, who was refusing to meet my eyes. And finally I looked at my mother. My eyes were dry. My face was expressionless. But the energy radiating off me must have been terrifying, because the room went quiet one by one. The chatter died down. The clinking of glasses stopped. Even Sophie stopped playing with the necklace and looked up at me. Renee? My mother asked, her voice faltering slightly. What is wrong with you? You are staring. It is rude. I looked at the beautiful decorations I had paid for. I looked at the expensive scotch my father was drinking, which I had bought. I looked at the diamond earrings in my sister's ears, which were a birthday gift from me 3 years ago. You are right, Mom, I said, my voice low, calm, and unrecognizable even to myself. Maya needs to learn a lesson tonight. She needs to learn that actions have consequences. And she needs to learn that you should never accept disrespect just because it comes from people you love. I took a step forward. So I am going to teach her that lesson right now. Brent scoffed. Okay, Supermom. Great speech. Now can you move? You are blocking the heat. I turned my head slowly to look at him. My eyes, which usually held warmth or patience, were now dead. They were the eyes of a CEO firing an embezzler. They were the eyes of a judge delivering a life sentence. You will not need the heat where you are going, Brent, I said softly. I unlocked my phone. My thumb hovered over the app that controlled the entire ecosystem of this house. You kicked my daughter out into the cold because you said there was no room for her, I continued, my voice rising just an octave, gaining strength. You said she didn't belong. You said this was a place for family. I looked around the room, making eye contact with every single person. Well, I have some bad news. I am looking at a room full of strangers. And strangers do not get to live in my house for free. I tapped the screen. The lights in the room flickered once, then died, plunging the room into the gray gloom of the winter afternoon. The hum of the furnace cut out instantly. Wanda shrieked. What happened? Clarence fixed the lights. He cannot fix it, Mom, I said, my voice cutting through the darkness. Because he does not own the switch. I do. And now the real party begins. The heavy oak door had barely clicked shut behind my daughter, but the silence it left behind was deafening. It was a vacuum that sucked the oxygen right out of the room, leaving only the crackling of the fireplace and the shallow, nervous breathing of the people who had just exiled a child into the freezing night. My mother smoothed her skirt, pretending that what she had just done was necessary parenting rather than heartless cruelty. My father took a long swallow of his cognac, his eyes fixed on the mantel clock, refusing to acknowledge the empty space where his granddaughter had stood moments ago. I stood alone in the center of the Persian rug. The heat from the fire was hitting my back, but I felt cold. It was a glacier cold, a deep, numbing freeze that started in my marrow and worked its way out. For years, I had swallowed their insults. I had smiled when they made me sit at the kids' table. I had paid their bills when they mocked my career. I had cooked their food while they treated me like the help. I did it because I thought that was the price of having a family. I thought that if I just gave enough, paid enough, and worked enough, eventually they would love me back. But as I looked at the closed front door, I realized the currency I had been paying with was counterfeit. They would never love me. They would only use me. And now they had tried to use my daughter as a pawn in their social climbing game. I reached behind my back. My fingers found the knot of the apron strings. The same apron I had worn for every Thanksgiving, every Christmas. and every Easter for the last decade. It was stained with the grease of the prime rib I had just cooked. It smelled of rosemary, garlic, and the sweat of my labor. It was the uniform of my servitude. I pulled the knot. It gave way with a soft release. The tension around my waist vanished. I pulled the loop over my head, my movements slow and deliberate. The room watched me. They were waiting for me to apologize. They were waiting for me to cry and run out the door after Maya. They were waiting for the doormat to lie back down so they could wipe their feet on me again. But the doormat was standing up. I held the apron in my hands. The floral fabric was stiff with dried gravy and splatters of beef fat. It was heavy with the mess of the meal they were currently digesting. I looked at it, and then I looked at Chantel. My sister was sitting on the velvet sofa, sipping her wine and checking her reflection in her phone screen. She was wearing a custom-made red silk dress that she had bragged about for weeks. She said it cost $800. She said it was delicate and required dry cleaning only. She looked perfect. She looked untouched by the ugly scene she had just instigated. She looked like she had won. I balled the apron up in my right hand. I squeezed it tight, feeling the cold grease seep onto my fingers. Renee put that down. My mother snapped, noticing the look in my eye. You are making a mess. Go wash your hands. I did not look at her. I kept my eyes locked on Chantel. You said I was happy to serve. I said, my voice barely a whisper. Chantel looked up annoyed. What did you say? I said you told Eleanor I was happy to serve. I took one step forward. Then I pulled my arm back. Well, here is your service. I threw the apron. I did not toss it. I pitched it with the force of a fastball. It flew across the 6 feet of space between us, spinning like a grand of dirty laundry. It hit Chantel square in the face. The heavy fabric wrapped around her head for a split second before sliding down her chest and landing in her lap. But the damage was done. The grease, the beef fat, the rosemary reduction. It smeared across her face. It matted her hair, and most importantly, it left a massive, dark, oily streak down the front of her pristine red silk dress. The scream that tore out of Chantel's throat was not human. It was the shriek of a banshee. She jumped up, clawing at the fabric, frantically trying to wipe the grease away, but only succeeding in grinding it deeper into the silk fibers. My dress, she screamed, her voice cracking. My dress. You ruined it. You crazy B-word, you ruined my dress. My mother gasped, jumping to her feet and rushing to Chantel's side, grabbing napkins from the coffee table. Oh my God. The silk. Get some club soda quickly. Renee, what is wrong with you? Have you lost your mind? But I was not looking at them. I was looking at Brent. Brent, the man of the house, the protector. He had watched me be humiliated all night with a smirk, but now that his trophy fiancée's dress was ruined, the beast awoke. He slammed his drink down on the coaster so hard the glass cracked. He stood up, his face flushing a deep, angry red. He marched toward me, crossing the room in 3 long strides until he was towering over me. He was a tall man used to using his size to intimidate people. He got right in my face, close enough that I could smell the expensive scotch on his breath. You are sick, he spat, his finger jabbing into the air inches from my nose. You are actually mentally unstable. Look at what you did. You come into this house with your negative energy, you upset my niece, you ruined dinner, and now you attack your sister. He looked around the room, appealing to the audience. I told you she was trouble, he said to his parents. I told you she was jealous. She cannot stand that Chantel is happy and successful. He turned back to me, his eyes narrowing. Get out, he growled. I stood my ground. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I looked him dead in the eye. Excuse me, I said calmly. You heard me. Brent shouted, his voice booming off the vaulted ceiling. Get out. Get your things, get in your beat-up car, and get off this property. You are banned. I do not want to see your face here ever again. This is a place for family and civilized people, not jealous, bitter women who throw garbage at us. He pointed to the front door, the same door Maya had been shoved through. Go, Brent commanded. Get out of my parents' house before I call the police and have you dragged out. The room went silent again, waiting for my reaction. They expected fear. They expected shame. They expected me to scurry away like a cockroach when the lights turn on. Instead, a sound bubbled up from my throat. It started as a low chuckle, but it grew. It swelled. It transformed into a full-throated laugh. I laughed loud and hard. I laughed until my shoulders shook. It was a terrifying sound in that tense room because it was the laughter of someone who knows the punchline of a joke no one else gets. Brent took a step back, unsettled by my reaction. You think this is funny? He asked incredulously. You think being homeless for Christmas is funny? I stopped laughing abruptly. The smile vanished from my face as if it had been wiped away by a cloth, leaving only cold, hard granite underneath. I tilted my head to the side, looking at him with mock confusion. I am sorry, Brent, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous register. I think I misheard you. I took a step toward him, forcing him to retreat. You said get out of whose house? Brent blinked, confused by the question. My parents' house, he stammered, gesturing to Clarence and Wanda. My future in-laws' house. The house where I am going to raise my children. Now get out. I shook my head slowly, clicking my tongue against my teeth. Tisk, tisk, tisk. That is embarrassing, Brent. For a real estate agent, you really should check your records better. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone again. The screen was still casting to the television above the fireplace, but no one had noticed it during the chaos. I pointed to the TV screen where the PDF of the warranty deed was displayed in high definition. I suggest you turn around and read line 4, I said, my voice slicing through the air like a scalpel. Brent turned. Clarence turned. Wanda looked up from scrubbing Chantel's dress. Eleanor and Richard peered over their glasses. On the screen, magnified for everyone to see, were the legal coordinates of the property, and right below that, in bold black letters, was the section labeled Grantee, the owner. It did not say Clarence Johnson. It did not say Wanda Johnson. It said Renee Johnson. I watched as Brent's eyes scanned the document. I saw the moment the words registered in his brain. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. His face went from red to a pasty shade of gray. You see, Brent? I said, stepping into his personal space, reclaiming the air he was breathing. You cannot kick me out of this house, because you are standing in my living room. You are drinking my scotch. You are warming your hands by my fire. And that table you had your feet on earlier, that is my table. I looked over at my parents, who were now frozen in horror. So let me ask you again, Brent, I said, my voice ringing with the finality of a judge's gavel. Whose house is this? The 65-inch television screen flickered for a moment, transitioning from the ambient fireplace loop to the stark high-contrast image of a legal document. The sudden shift in lighting cast a cold, clinical blue glow over the room, washing away the warm holiday atmosphere. Everyone blinked, adjusting their eyes to the brightness. The silence in the room was no longer the silence of awkwardness. It was the silence of confused anticipation. I watched Brent's eyes narrow as he squinted at the screen. He took a step closer, his arrogance faltering for the first time that night. As a real estate agent, he looked at documents like this every day. He knew the layout. He knew the fonts. He knew exactly where to look for the information that mattered. What is this? He muttered, more to himself than anyone else. This looks like a warranty deed. It is a warranty deed, Brent, I said, my voice projecting clearly from the center of the room. It is the warranty deed for the property located at 429 Oak Creek Drive, the property you are currently standing in. I walked over to the television, standing next to it, like a professor giving a lecture. I tapped the screen, pointing to the top section. You see here where it lists the grantor, I asked. That is the person selling or transferring the property. Do you see the names Clarence and Wanda Johnson? My mother let out a strangled sound, a gasp that was half panic and half fury. Renee, turn that off right now. This is private family business. You are humiliating us. But I did not turn it off. I did not even look at her. I kept my eyes on Brent, who was now reading the document with a growing look of horror. And right below that, Brent, I continued. The grantee. The person who receives the property. The person who holds the title. The person who owns every brick, every shingle, and every blade of grass. Read the name Brent. Read it out loud. Brent swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbed in his throat. He looked at his parents, then at mine, then back at the screen. Renee Johnson, he whispered. The name came out like a curse. I nodded slowly. That is right. Renee Johnson. Not Clarence. Not Wanda. Me. I turned to face the room, fully addressing the stunned audience. Eleanor was holding her wineglass halfway to her mouth, frozen. Richard was frowning, looking from my father to the screen, trying to calculate the deception. 5 years ago, I began speaking to the in-laws, letting the truth spill out. You all think my parents are retired. You think they live a life of leisure on a pension and investments. But the truth is, 5 years ago, my father gambled away his pension. He gambled away their savings. And then he gambled away the equity in this house. Clarence put his head in his hands, unable to look at his new family. The bank was 3 days away from foreclosing. I continued relentlessly. They were going to put a sign in the yard. They were going to auction this place off on the courthouse steps. My mother called me, screaming, crying, begging me to save their reputation. She didn't care about having a roof over her head. She cared about what the neighbors would think. So I stepped in. I used my savings. I liquidated my stock portfolio. I took out a loan against my own assets. I paid off the gambling debts, which were over $450,000. And in exchange, I took the title. I looked at my mother, who was now weeping softly into a napkin, not out of remorse, but out of shame. I bought this house to save them from the street. I pay the mortgage. I pay the property taxes. I pay the insurance. I even pay for the landscaping service that keeps the lawn looking perfect for your visits. Brent looked at Chantel. You told me your dad bought this place in the 90s. You told me it was fully paid off. Chantel looked down, picking at the grease stain on her dress. I thought it was, she mumbled. I didn't know. You didn't know? I laughed, a harsh, biting sound. You didn't know because you never asked. You just assumed the money appeared by magic. Well, I am the magician Chantel, and I am tired of performing tricks for an ungrateful audience. I turned back to the screen, swiping to the next page of the document. But that is not the most interesting part, I said. You see, when I bought the house, I was kind. I was a good daughter. I didn't want to kick them out. So I had my lawyer draft a special clause. It is called a life estate. I looked at Brent. You know what a life estate is, right, Brent? Brent nodded slowly, still in shock. It means the previous owners have the right to live on the property until they die, even if they don't own it anymore. Exactly, I said. It was my way of guaranteeing they would always have a home. I gave them security. I gave them dignity. I zoomed in on a specific paragraph near the bottom of the page, Section 7, Paragraph B. But every contract has conditions. I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried to every corner of the room. My lawyer insisted on a revocation clause. He said, Renee, you are too generous. You need to protect yourself. So we added this. I read the legal text out loud, my voice steady and unwavering. The life estate granted herein shall be immediately revocable by the grantee in the event that the grantors engage in conduct that is abusive, threatening, or significantly detrimental to the mental or emotional well-being of the grantee or the grantee's direct descendants. I let the words hang in the air. Mental or emotional well-being of the grantee's direct descendants. I turned to face my mother. My direct descendant is sitting in a freezing car right now, I said, my voice shaking with suppressed rage. You dragged my daughter out of this house. You told her she wasn't good enough. You told her she was dirty. You gave her birthright to a stranger, and then you locked her out in the cold. I looked at my father. And you? You stood there and watched. You let them treat your granddaughter like a stray dog because you wanted to impress these people. I gestured to Section 7, Paragraph B on the screen. You broke the contract, I stated simply. You violated the clause. You caused significant emotional harm to my child. And in doing so, you just voided your right to live here. Clarence looked up, his face gray and aged. Renee, please. It is Christmas. You cannot be serious. I am deadly serious, Dad, I replied. You gambled with your money and you lost. Then you gambled with my love and you lost. And tonight you gambled with my daughter's heart. That was the one bet you could not afford to lose. I pulled up a new document on the screen. It was a digital eviction notice dated for today with a timestamp from 3 minutes ago. This has already been filed with the county clerk, I said. It is official. The life estate is revoked. You are now trespassing. I turned to Brent, who looked like he was about to be sick. So when I asked you whose house this is, I wasn't asking for an opinion. I was stating a fact. This is my house. These are my lights. This is my heat. And I am done subsidizing people who hate me. Eleanor stood up. She smoothed her skirt, her face a mask of distaste. Well, she said, looking at my parents. I think we have seen enough. Richard, get our coats. No, wait, Wanda pleaded, grabbing Eleanor's arm. Eleanor, please. She is lying. She is just upset. We can fix this. Eleanor pulled her arm away as if my mother were contagious. Lying. The woman has a deed on the television, Wanda. And frankly, the way you treated that little girl, well, it was appalling. We might be wealthy, but we are not monsters. Richard walked past my father, shaking his head. You told me you were a partner at the firm Clarence. You told me you owned 3 properties. It was all a lie, wasn't it? My father said nothing. He just stared at the floor, the weight of his deception finally crushing him. I stood by the television, the blue light illuminating me like a vengeful angel. I watched as the facade of their perfect life crumbled in real time. I watched as the in-laws they tried so hard to impress looked at them with disgust. And I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt clean. I looked at my mother and father one last time. You have 30 days, I said. But if I were you, I would start packing tonight. Because I am coming back tomorrow with a locksmith. And unlike you, I don't give second chances to people who hurt my family. The blue glow of the warranty deed faded as I swiped my thumb across the phone screen. The image on the television shifted instantly, replacing the legal text with the stark, unforgiving grid of a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet. It was a document I updated every Sunday night, a habit born from necessity and maintained by the need for control. The rows and columns were color-coded: green for income, which was entirely generated by me; red for expenses, which were entirely generated by the people standing in this room. The silence in the living room was heavy. It was the suffocating quiet of a tomb. My father Clarence was staring at the floor, his shoulders hunched as if he were trying to make himself disappear. My mother Wanda was gripping the arm of the sofa, her knuckles white, her eyes darting between the screen and her guests, terrified of the numbers that were magnified in high definition for everyone to see. I walked closer to the television, my heels clicking rhythmically on the hardwood floor. The sound was sharp, like a metronome counting down the remaining seconds of their dignity. I pointed to column A, row 12. Let us start with the garage. I said, my voice smooth and conversational. Richard, you mentioned earlier how much you admired my father's Lexus. You said it was a sign of a man who appreciates quality engineering. Richard shifted uncomfortably in his chair, pulling at his collar. Well, yes. It is a fine automobile. I nodded. It is. And it costs $800 a month to lease. I tapped the cell on the screen, highlighting the recurring payment to Lexus Financial Services. You see, Dad told you he handles his own finances. He told you his consulting business is booming. But if you look at the source of funds column right here, you will notice something interesting. The money does not come from Clarence Johnson Consulting. It comes from Renee Johnson Personal Checking. I turned to look at my father. Dad, you haven't paid a car note since 2019. Every time you drive to the golf course, every time you pull up to the valet stand to look important, you are driving a car that I pay for. You are burning gas that I bought. You are living a luxury car commercial on a bus pass budget. Clarence made a small noise in his throat, a pathetic whimper of protest, but he did not speak. He could not. The numbers were right there in black and white. I swiped up on the screen, scrolling down to the credit card section. And let us talk about yesterday. I looked at Chantel. She was still dabbing at the grease stain on her dress, but she froze when I said yesterday. She knew what was coming. She knew exactly what she had done. I zoomed in on a transaction dated December 24th. Serenity Luxury Spa, I read aloud. $850. I turned to the room, addressing Brent directly. Your fiancée told me she needed this spa day to look perfect for you. She said it was an investment in the family's image. She got the gold facial, the hot stone massage, and the deluxe pedicure. It sounds relaxing, doesn't it? Brent looked at Chantel, his expression hardening. You told me you paid for that with your bonus money from your influencer brand deals. I laughed. A dry, humorless sound. Influencer deals, Brent. Chantel has not made a dime from social media in 6 months. She stole my emergency credit card, the one I gave Mom for fixing the water heater or repairing the roof. She took it, and she spent nearly $1,000 to pamper herself while I was working a double shift at the warehouse. I walked over to Chantel, standing over her. You look expensive, Chantel, I said softly. Your skin is glowing. Your nails are perfect. And every inch of that beauty is stolen property. You are wearing my money. You are literally wearing my hard work on your face while you sit there and call me the help. Chantel began to cry. Not the fake pretty tears she used to get her way, but ugly, gasping sobs of humiliation. She covered her face with her hands, trying to hide from the glow of the television screen. But I was not done. I had one more receipt to show, the most painful one of all. I scrolled to the bottom of the spreadsheet to the section labeled Holiday Expenses. And finally we have tonight, I said, gesturing to the dining room where the remnants of the feast were still sitting on the table. Whole Foods Market, the wine cellar, the florist, total cost $1,532. I looked at Eleanor. Mrs. Anderson, you complimented the wine earlier. You said the vintage was exquisite. You were right. It is a $200 bottle. And the prime rib, you said it was restaurant quality. It should be. It cost more than my weekly grocery budget for myself and my daughter. I walked to the center of the room, standing between the two families. You sat at that table and you praised the food. You praised the wine. You praised the atmosphere. But not once did any of you ask who paid for it. You just assumed that because you were served on fine china, the people serving you could afford it. I turned to face Eleanor and Richard directly. My voice dropped, losing its sarcasm and becoming deadly serious. You think you are merging families with a wealthy, successful clan? You think my parents are your peers? You think they are pillars of the community? I pointed at my parents, who looked like they were shrinking into the furniture. They are not your peers. They are destitute. They have zero savings. They have zero equity. They have zero income. The only reason they are not living in a state-assisted housing facility is because I have been propping them up for 5 years. I took a deep breath, letting the reality sink in. They are acting rich, Eleanor. It is a costume. Just like a Santa Claus suit at the mall. They put it on to fool you. And the person paying for the costume, the person stitching it together, the person keeping the lights on so you can admire the sparkle, is the daughter they just kicked out into the cold. I pointed toward the garage door, toward the mudroom where I had sat just 20 minutes ago. You asked me to get you ice. You treated me like a servant. But the truth is, I am the bank. I am the employer. I am the landlord. I looked at Brent, who was staring at his shoes, his face pale. You called me jealous, Brent. You said I was bitter. I smiled a cold, terrifying smile. I am not jealous of you. How could I be jealous of a man who is about to marry into a bankruptcy case? I am not bitter. I am exhausted. I am exhausted from carrying dead weight. I tapped the phone screen one last time, turning the display off. The room plunged back into semi-darkness, illuminated only by the dying fire. So no, I concluded. I am not the help. I am the golden goose. And you just slaughtered me for a dinner you couldn't afford. The silence that followed was absolute. It was broken only by the sound of Richard clearing his throat. He stood up slowly, buttoning his tight blazer with a look of utter disgust. But he wasn't looking at me. He was looking at Clarence. Clarence, Richard said, his voice icy. I think we have been misled. He turned to his wife. Get your coat, Eleanor. We are leaving. But Richard, Wanda cried, jumping up. We haven't had dessert. Please don't go. This is all a misunderstanding. Renee is just having an episode. Richard ignored her. He walked past my father without making eye contact. There is no misunderstanding, Wanda, he said. The math is on the screen. And I do not do business with frauds. He looked at me as he passed. He nodded once. A short, respectful nod. The kind of nod one shark gives to another. Good luck with the eviction, young lady, he said. I watched them walk to the door. I watched my parents' empire of lies crumble into dust. And as the front door closed behind them, leaving us alone in the house, I knew the receipts had done their job. The transaction was complete, and now it was time to collect the final balance. The heavy front door clicked shut, sealing the exit of the wealthy in-laws and leaving a suffocating silence in its wake. The performance was over. The audience had walked out, and now the actors were left on the stage with the house lights up, revealing the cheap cardboard set for what it truly was. My mother Wanda stood frozen by the dining table, her hands gripping the back of a chair as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. My father Clarence had sunk onto the sofa, his head in his hands, the picture of a defeated man. Chantel was still weeping softly, but the sound was muffled by the realization that her golden ticket to a life of leisure had just walked out the door in disgust. But I was not looking at them. I was looking at my phone screen, where the blue icon of my smart home application glowed with waiting potential. For years, this app had been a tool of convenience. I used it to make sure the house was warm for them when they woke up. I used it to turn on the porch lights so they would feel safe coming home at night. I used it to ensure their internet was fast enough for Chantel's streaming and my father's sports games. I had used technology to wrap them in a cocoon of comfort. Now I was going to use it to strip that cocoon away, layer by layer. You ruined everything, Wanda finally whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of shock and venom. She turned to face me, her eyes red-rimmed and wild. Do you have any idea what you just did, Renee? You just destroyed your sister's future. Richard and Eleanor will never let Brent marry her now. You humiliated us. You exposed us. Why? Why would you do something so hateful? I looked at her calmly, my thumb hovering over the master control tab on my screen. I did not destroy anything, Mom. I said, my voice steady. I just turned on the lights. If the room looks ugly, that is because you filled it with garbage, not because I flipped the switch. But you want to talk about hateful. Let us talk about hateful. Hateful is locking a 12-year-old girl outside in 30-degree weather because she wanted a hug. Hateful is giving her heirloom necklace to a stranger. Hateful is eating a $300 roast while your granddaughter eats cold chicken next to a litter box. I tapped the first icon on my screen. The Wi-Fi symbol. Chantel suddenly gasped, looking down at her phone. Wait, what happened? My signal just dropped. I was trying to DM Brent. Mom, the internet is gone. That is the first layer, I said. The connectivity. You use the internet I pay for to post lies about your life. You use it to ignore your family. You use it to shop with money you do not have. Consider it a detox. I tapped the next icon. The garage door security lock. A heavy mechanical clank echoed from the side of the house, followed by the beep of the electronic deadbolt engaging. What was that? Clarence asked, lifting his head. That was the garage door locking, I explained. And the internal door to the garage locking as well. You see, Dad, I know you. When things get hard, you like to get in that Lexus I pay for and drive away. You like to run from your problems. Well, tonight, you are going to sit in them. You are not going anywhere until we are finished here. Renee, stop this! Wanda screamed, rushing toward me. Give me that phone! You are acting like a tyrant. I took a step back, holding the phone out of her reach. I am not a tyrant, Mom. I am the homeowner. And I am just adjusting the settings to reflect the current status of the residence. I scrolled down to the environmental controls. The Nest thermostat was currently set to a cozy 72 degrees. The little orange circle on my screen looked warm and inviting. You said there was no room for us at the table. I said, my thumb circling the temperature dial. You made my daughter sit in the cold draft of the mudroom. You sent her out to a freezing car. I slid the digital dial down. 70, 65, 60, 55, 50. I tapped confirm. Immediately the hum of the furnace, which had been a constant comforting background noise, cut out. The silence that followed was heavy. The vents stopped pushing warm air. The house, which was built with high ceilings and large windows, would begin to bleed heat rapidly in the winter night. I hope you have some sweaters, I said coldly. Though I suppose you can burn all that wrapping paper in the fireplace if you get desperate. Just be careful not to damage the flue. I would hate to have to deduct repairs from your security deposit. Oh wait, you did not pay a security deposit. Brent, who had been standing near the window staring out into the darkness, finally turned around. He looked pale. The arrogance that had defined him all evening was gone, replaced by the terrified realization of a man who had bet on the wrong horse. Renee, look. He started, his voice shaky. I think things got out of hand. We are all emotional. Maybe we should just calm down. You made your point. You own the house. We get it. Can you turn the heat back on? My parents, we can talk about this. I laughed. It was a sharp, biting sound. Talk about it. There is nothing to talk about, Brent. You told me to get out. You tried to ban me from my own property. You showed me exactly who you are. I walked over to him, invading his personal space, just as he had invaded mine earlier. But since you are the man of the house, or at least you thought you were, let us talk business. You are a real estate agent, right? You sell homes. You find places for people to live. Brent nodded, slowly, wary of where this was going. Yes, I am a realtor. Good, I said. Then you should have no problem finding a new place for your future in-laws. I pulled up the eviction notice again. According to Georgia law, I have to give 30 days notice for an eviction even if there is no lease, so consider this your verbal notice followed by the digital one I just emailed to all of you. You have 30 days. By January 24th, this house needs to be empty, broom clean condition, keys on the counter. I looked at my parents, who were huddled together on the sofa, shivering slightly more from fear than cold. And Brent, I continued, here is a little tip for your property search. When you are running credit checks for them, you might want to lower your filters. I tapped my screen one last time, bringing up a credit monitoring app. My father's credit score is 480. My mother's is 495. They have multiple delinquencies, 3 charge-offs, and a repossession on their record from 5 years ago. Brent's jaw dropped. He looked at Clarence with pure horror. 480? Clarence, you told me you had an 800 score. You told me you were financing the wedding. I did not tell you that, Clarence mumbled, looking away. I said we would handle it. He lied. Brent, I interjected. Just like he lied about the house. Just like he lied about the car. They have no money, they have no credit, and in 30 days they will have no address. I stepped back, looking at the 3 of them. A failed influencer in a stained dress, a gambler in a leased life, and a social climber who had climbed a ladder that was burning down. So, Brent, I said, my voice dripping with mock sympathy, it looks like you have a lot of work to do. You need to find a rental that accepts tenants with sub 500 credit scores, no proof of income, and a history of financial irresponsibility. I paused, tilting my head. Maybe you can let them move in with you, although given that you are leasing a Lexus, you probably cannot afford to support two dependents, can you? Brent said nothing. He just looked at Chantel with a look that wasn't love. It wasn't even pity. It was the look of a man calculating his exit strategy. I put my phone back in my pocket. The house was already feeling cooler. The shadows seemed longer. I am leaving now, I announced. I am going to get my daughter. We are going to a hotel. A nice one, where the heat works and the people are kind. I walked to the front door. My hand rested on the brass handle. I turned back one last time. You have 30 days. If you are not out, I will have the sheriff here to remove you. And Mom, do not try to take the furniture. I have the receipts for every single piece. I opened the door, and the cold wind rushed in, meeting the cooling air of the hallway. I stepped out into the night, leaving them in the dark, leaving them in the cold, leaving them to feast on the ashes of the bridges they had burned. The temperature in the house had dropped to 58 degrees, but the chill radiating from Richard and Eleanor Anderson was far colder than the winter air seeping through the vents. The illusion of warmth and wealth that my parents had carefully constructed over 5 years had evaporated in less than 5 minutes, leaving behind only the ugly, naked truth of their desperation. Richard stood by the door, buttoning his cashmere coat with aggressive, jerky movements. He looked at my father, Clarence, not with anger, but with the kind of profound disdain a man reserves for something he stepped in on the sidewalk. Clarence Richard said, his voice cutting through the silence like a razor blade. Do not call me. Do not call my office. Do not come to the club. If I see you on the golf course, I will have security escort you off the premises for trespassing. I do not associate with liars, and I certainly do not do business with paupers. But Richard? My father stammered, rising from the sofa, his knees shaking. We can explain. The market has been tough. I was just waiting for a liquidity event. Stop it, Richard snapped, holding up a hand. Just stop. The only liquidity event happening here is the sweat running down your face. You are broke, Clarence, and you tried to use my son to bail you out. It is pathetic. He turned to his wife. Come on, Eleanor. Let us get out of this icebox before we catch something. Poverty is contagious. Eleanor nodded, adjusting her fur collar. She looked at Chantel, who was standing near the fireplace, shivering in her stained red dress. The look Eleanor gave her was devoid of pity. It was the look one gives to a piece of merchandise that turned out to be defective. Come along, Brent, Eleanor commanded without looking back. Brent hesitated. He looked at Chantel. He looked at the life he thought he was building. Then he looked at his mother, who controlled his trust fund, and his father, who employed him. The calculation in his eyes was visible. It took him exactly 3 seconds to choose his survival over his fiancée. Brent, wait, Chantel cried, reaching out to grab his arm. You are not leaving, are you? We are getting married in June. The invitations are already printed. Brent pulled his arm away, as if she had burned him. He took a step back, putting distance between his tailored suit and her ruin. I do not think so, Chantel, he said, his voice flat and cowardly. I cannot marry into this. My reputation is everything in this town. If people find out your parents are bankrupt and getting evicted, it will ruin me. I sell luxury homes, Chantel. I cannot be attached to a foreclosure case. But I love you, Chantel sobbed, the tears finally cutting through her narcissism. Does that not matter? Brent looked at her with cold, dead eyes. You lied to me, Chantel. You said you had money. You said this house was an asset. You said your sister was a loser we would not have to deal with. But she is the only one with 2 nickels to rub together. I cannot trust you. And frankly, I cannot afford you. He turned his back on her. The ring, Chantel. Send it back to my lawyer. Or keep it and pawn it. You are going to need the cash for a moving truck. No, Chantel shrieked, collapsing onto the rug in a heap of red silk and misery. You cannot do this to me. Renee, tell him. Tell him you were lying. Fix this. She looked at me, her eyes filled with hate. "This is your fault. You did this. You were jealous of me, so you burned my life down. I hate you. I hope you die alone in this stupid house." I watched her scream. I watched her thrash on the floor like a toddler. I felt nothing, no guilt. No satisfaction. Just the clinical detachment of a surgeon cutting out a tumor. "I did not ruin your life, Chantel," I said calmly. "I just stopped paying for the lies you used to build it." If the foundation was strong, the truth would not have knocked it over. Richard and Eleanor were already halfway out the door, the cold wind swirling around them. Brent was hurrying after them, keeping his head down, trying to escape the blast radius of his failed relationship. Trailing behind them, looking confused and forgotten, was Sophie, the 10-year-old niece. Sophie was clutching her Nintendo Switch in one hand, and my great-grandmother's pearl necklace was still swinging from her neck. She looked scared, eyes darting between the screaming woman on the floor and the adults rushing toward the exit. "Stop!" I commanded, my voice cracking like a whip. Richard and Eleanor froze in the doorway. They turned back, annoyed. "What now, Renee?" Eleanor sighed. "We are leaving. You made your point." "I am not talking to you," I said, walking toward them. I kept my eyes fixed on the little girl. I walked right up to Sophie. She shrank back against the doorframe, sensing the intensity radiating off me. I did not want to scare a child, but I had a promise to keep. A promise to my daughter who was waiting in the car. "That necklace," I said, pointing to the single pearl resting against her tartan dress. "It does not belong to you." Sophie looked down at the pearl, then up at me. Her lip trembled. "But Grandpa Clarence gave it to me. He said I was a Johnson." "Grandpa Clarence gave away something that wasn't his to give," I said, my voice firm but not shouting. "That necklace belonged to my great-grandmother Rose. She worked very hard for it, and it belongs to my daughter Maya." I held out my hand, palm open. "Give it to me, please." Sophie looked at her grandmother Eleanor for help. Eleanor looked at the cheap gold chain and rolled her eyes. "Oh, for God's sake," Eleanor huffed. "Just give it to her, Sophie. It is probably fake anyway. We will buy you a real diamond choker tomorrow. A much nicer one." Sophie reached behind her neck, fumbling with the clasp. Her small fingers struggled with the tiny mechanism. I did not help her. I waited. I watched. I needed to see the transfer. I needed to see the physical act of them relinquishing their claim on my history. Finally, the clasp clicked open. The pearl slid into Sophie's hand. She dropped it into my palm. The metal was warm from her skin. It felt heavy. Heavier than a piece of jewelry should be. It carried the weight of 4 generations of women who had survived in dignity, so I could stand here today and demand respect. "Thank you," I said, closing my fingers around the pearl. "Now get out of my house." Richard grabbed Sophie's hand and yanked her out the door. Eleanor followed, her nose high in the air, sniffing disdainfully at the cold foyer. Brent was the last one out. He paused for a fraction of a second, looking back at the warm glow of the kitchen he would never eat in again. Then he met my eyes. "You are a monster, Renee," he whispered. I smiled. It was the smile of the wolf who had just eaten the hunter. "Maybe," I said, "but at least I am a monster with a mortgage paid in full." I stepped forward and slammed the heavy oak door in his face. The sound reverberated through the entryway, a final decisive boom that signaled the end of an era. I threw the deadbolt. Click. I threw the secondary lock. Click. I turned around, leaning my back against the door. The house was quiet. The only sound was Chantel sobbing softly in the living room, and my father pouring himself a drink in the dark. The air was getting colder by the minute. I opened my hand and looked at the pearl. It glowed softly in the dim light of the foyer. It was safe. Maya was safe. And for the first time in my life, I was free. I pushed off the door and walked past the living room without looking at the wreckage of my family. I had one more stop to make before I left this house for good. I needed to get my daughter and take her to a place where she would never have to sit at a plastic table again. The walk from the front door to my Range Rover was the longest and shortest walk of my life. The gravel crunched loudly under my boots, a stark contrast to the silence I had left behind in the house. The wind was biting, whipping my hair across my face, but for the first time in years I did not feel the cold. I felt a burning, radiating heat in my chest, the fire of a woman who has finally burned down the prison she built for herself. I reached the car and unlocked it, the lights flashing a welcome in the darkness. Maya was sitting in the front seat, huddled in her coat, her face pressed against the glass. When I opened the door, she jumped, her eyes wide and fearful, searching my face for signs of defeat. She expected her mother to come back broken. She expected us to go back inside and apologize. She expected the cycle to continue because that is all she had ever known. But I was not broken. I was whole. I slid into the driver's seat and closed the door, shutting out the world. I turned to my daughter. Her cheeks were stained with dried tears and she was shivering. "Mom," she whispered, "are we going back? Did Grandma say we could come in?" I reached into my pocket and pulled out the single pearl on the gold chain. It caught the light from the dashboard, glowing softly in the dark car. I took Maya's hand and pressed the necklace into her palm. Her fingers curled around it instinctively. "We are never going back, Maya," I said, my voice fierce and steady. "And you do not need their permission to be a Johnson. You are the heir. You are the legacy. This belongs to you, not because they gave it to you, but because I took it back." Maya looked at the pearl, then up at me. A slow realization dawned in her eyes. The fear began to recede, replaced by awe. I started the engine. The powerful rumble of the motor felt like a beast waking up. I put the car in reverse and backed out of the driveway. I did not look at the house. I did not look at the windows to see if they were watching. I simply shifted gears and drove away, leaving the darkness behind us. "Where are we going?" Maya asked as we merged onto the main road. I smiled. "The St. Regis," I said. "I just booked the presidential suite. And we are going to order room service. Lobster steak, chocolate cake. Whatever you want. We are going to have our own Christmas dinner, Maya. And nobody is going to tell us where to sit." That night in the hotel room, surrounded by silk sheets and eating filet mignon on a white tablecloth, Maya looked happier than I had ever seen her. We laughed. We watched movies. We jumped on the bed. For the first time on Christmas, we were not walking on eggshells, we were dancing on them. 3 months have passed since that night, and the landscape of our lives has changed completely. I followed through on every single threat I made. The eviction notice was served the next morning. My parents tried to fight it. They called relatives trying to shame me. They told everyone I was ungrateful and cruel. But then I posted the receipts. I didn't post them publicly, I just sent them to the family group chat. The car payments, the mortgage statements, the credit card bills. The silence from the extended family was immediate. Nobody wanted to defend moochers when the math was staring them in the face. They moved out on January 24th. The house was sold 2 weeks later. The market was hot, and I walked away with a profit of $230,000 after paying off the remainder of the mortgage. I put that money into a trust fund for Maya. The money they tried to steal from her future is now locked away, earning interest for her college tuition. My parents are currently living in a one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of town. It is a grim complex with thin walls and no security gate. My father had to sell his golf clubs to pay the deposit. My mother has stopped going to church because she is too ashamed to face her friends without her designer clothes and luxury car. They call me sometimes, leaving weeping voicemails about how hard their life is. I do not listen to them. I just hit delete. And Chantel, my golden sister, the influencer, reality hit her the hardest. Brent broke up with her via text message 3 days after Christmas. He is now dating a dermatologist from Buckhead. Chantel had to get a job, a real job. She is working as a waitress at a diner near the airport. I stopped by there once, not to talk, just to see. I watched her wearing a polyester uniform, carrying a tray of pancakes to a table of truck drivers. Her feet looked tired. She looked humbled. She saw me sitting in my car, and for a moment our eyes met. She didn't glare. She just looked down and went back to work. She finally learned what it means to serve. As for me, I am currently sitting on a chairlift in Aspen, Colorado. The air here is crisp and clean. Below me, the snow stretches out like a white blanket covering all the ugly parts of the world. Maya is skiing ahead of me, her laughter echoing off the pines. She is wearing her pearl necklace tucked safely inside her thermal shirt. My phone buzzes in my pocket. I pull it out. It is a text from a number I deleted but recognize. It is my mother. Renee, please call us. We miss you. The apartment is so cold. We are family. You only get one mother. Please let us come home. I stare at the words. A year ago, this text would have made me cry. It would have made me feel guilty. It would have made me open my wallet and my door. But today I feel nothing. I feel the wind on my face. I feel the sun on my skin. I feel the peace of a bank account that is mine and a life that is free. I do not reply. I do not type a justification. I simply tap the info icon. I scroll down to the bottom in red letters. Block this caller. I press it. The message disappears. The connection is severed. I put the phone back in my pocket and pull my goggles down. The lift reaches the top of the mountain. I slide off my skis, cutting into the fresh powder. I look down at the slope ahead. It is steep, fast, and exhilarating. Come on, Mom, Maya yells from down the hill. Catch me if you can. I push off and fly down the mountain, leaving the ghosts of my past buried under the snow. I am not Renee the daughter anymore. I am Renee, the owner of my destiny. And the view from here is spectacular. The most powerful lesson from this journey is that toxic family members often rely on your silence and your desire to be a good person to maintain their control. They weaponize the word family to demand loyalty they do not return. But true family is not defined by blood. It is defined by mutual respect and love. You cannot buy affection from people who are committed to misunderstanding you, and you should never set yourself on fire to keep others warm. The moment you stop seeking their validation is the moment you become invincible. If you have ever felt like the outsider in your own home, or if you are working hard to break a cycle of toxicity for your children, hit that like button and subscribe. Share this story with someone who needs to know that it is okay to choose yourself. Your peace is worth more than their approval. Thank you for watching. And remember, you are the architect of your own life, so build something that makes you proud.